failure or liver failure, or if you're on any immunosuppressive drugs. So commonest organism is Candida albicans. So what they say is it forms a biofilm which doesn't allow the fungal agents to penetrate. Um, so you have to be very careful when you see a patient with comorbidities and comes with infection. And always you plan for a two-stage revision. Literature also advises that. And you need to continue the antifungal agents, sometimes 6 to 8 months. And you have to monitor the patient. But some literature, some of the patients even failed with antifungal agents, ended up with amputation, fusion. So you have to have a high suspicion. So anybody, any persons? Fluconazole is not a costly medicine. I don't know the price, but you need to continue. Yeah, yeah. But sometimes these amphotericin and all, they are very bit toxic and costly. But the fluconazole oral is easy to take, and luckily you are sensitive to that. So 8 months treatment is fine. He is quite supple. Hope that he continues. No, always, all are there. Whenever I take a sample, we always send for bacterial and fungal culture.
What is the procedure for fungal?
No, we send the tissues or fluid immediately to the lab. We inform them, and it is normal container. Normal container. Yeah, I mean, so luckily, 10 years, I do all injection in my OPD and aspiration as well. So fine with that so far. I mean, I do it with all aseptic precautions.
Any opinion on this?
Sorry?
Yeah, I wanted to just give one or two comments. Fungal infection is very rare, but one always need to keep this thing in mind while treating with the periprosthetic joint infections. Two important things. One important point is immunosuppression. Whatever, it may be diabetic immunosuppression therapy, whatever, it was rightly shown in the literature review. Immunosuppression, some evidence of immunosuppression. And second group is this farmers or people who are working in the barefooted in the open fields. Those are the two groups of patients who are likely to get fungal infection. So one should have an index of suspicion in these two group of patients. Next, number two, in this case, since you are lucky to that you got Candida in your culture from the beginning before doing the debridement and all these things.
Yeah.
I would have added amphotericin B to the cement while putting the cement as a spacer. Amphotericin B can be added to the cement, and though it is very toxic intravenously or whatever, but adding cement, it doesn't usually get a very less dose of amphotericin B locally, and that doesn't get absorbed to the systemic circulation, so less toxic, but it would have acted better.
Yeah.
Number three, antifungal treatment has to be given minimum 6 months period. Probably post-operatively, because ESR, CRP came down, patient showed clinical improvement, it was stopped. But whatever, even if patient is completely all right, the infectious disease specialist, they recommend that antifungal treatment has to be given minimum 6. It requires a long period of antifungal treatment.
Sure.
That is the thing. And usually in common practice, people when send a culture, they don't get any growth. When you don't get any growth, still infection is suspected, then think of fungus. Okay, and sometimes histopathologist, if he's good histopathologist, will tell that there are fungus in the histopathologist, then mind changes. Or else, whenever you see culture, there is no growth, but a strongly you suspect infection, fungus or tuberculosis in our country, it comes as a differential diagnosis. There are two things, but it's a fantastic case. Thank you very much.
It's a bit lucky, because oral antibiotics was sensitive to this, so it's fine so far.
You are lucky to get,
it's
first.
toxic. You have to monitor it. Costly.
Sure. Candida from the first instance you got, you were lucky. Otherwise, you don't get anything from the beginning. Then you just beat around the bush and it becomes a problem.
So one more thing is, when we are taking the sample, some of the times we get a negative if you take a swab, it becomes negative. So what microbiologist advice is, if you get a fluid, send it in the anaerobic aerobic culture bottles. So they can, because that way, because some of the patients, they come with antibiotic already on. So that way this sample helps. Sometimes it helped me.
The tissue is the best.
Tissue, and if you have fluid, send it in the anaerobic or aerobic bottle rather than simple plain tube.
The best thing is actually use the bigger detergent. Normally,
Okay.
especially with the high cases, you can't just stay out
This is option.
We know from the day one it is a fungal infection and it is resistant to treatment, and it is the age and the renal failure.
Only, I think Candida albicans. I invite Dr. Setpati, postgraduate with Dr. Dhanakar Rai, to present his case.
Good evening, sir. So I'm audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Good evening, everyone present here. Today I'm going to present an interesting case in this COVID era. So, a 37-year-old female came to EMD on the postpartum day 2 with COVID positive status. While receiving in the EMD, patient was intubated in the outside hospital. So after seeing her status, patient was shifted to COVID ICU, and patient underwent a stormy ICU stay for about 20 days in the B block. So during the ICU stay, patient had an attack of had an episode of cardiac arrest, for which she was revived, and patient was extubated following 3 days of admission. Following the incident, patient had another episode of unconsciousness, for which she was reintubated and extubated after 10 days of the stay. So patient became COVID negative 20 days after the stay. While during the stay, she was managed with steroids, anticoagulants, remdesivir, and other supportive cares. So after the patient was transferred to A block, we got a call from the general surgery department regarding the progressive development of gangrene in his left toes, and over this the gangrene was still till the midfoot. So after evaluating the other causes for gangrene, so this is the clinical images showing the extent of the gangrene till the midfoot. So after evaluating other causes, we have proceeded with further management. Patient also had bilateral foot drop, for which they suspected post-COVID Guillain-Barré syndrome. So after evaluating other causes for the gangrene, we have done a CT angiography of the lower limbs. So it revealed the thrombosis of the common femoral artery with reformed flow in the superficial femoral and profunda femoris through the collaterals. So for this, we have done a catheter-based thrombolysis for the thrombus in the common femoral artery. Following the intervention, on the next day, patient developed a compartment syndrome on the same leg, that's the affected side, the left leg. for which she underwent an emergency fasciotomy in the left leg. So after the patient became quite stable, we have also done the wound debridement for the foot, and we have planned on void amputation for the same case. So these are intra-op images showing the amputation level, and this is the immediate post-op image after suturing. These are the next follow-up images after that the wound has healed well. So this is the post-op images showing the calcaneotibial arthrodesis using the 6.5 mm cancer screws. So coming to summary, she's a 39-year-old female on the postpartum day 2 had COVID positive symptoms and was intubated. Patient was diagnosed with COVID pneumonia, and she was also diagnosed with post-COVID type 1 respiratory failure, forefoot gangrene, and Guillain-Barré syndrome, that is bilateral foot drop. Patient also had grade 2 bed sores for which wound debridement and grafting was done. So after this, the literature search was done, for which we have many cases showing that patients with COVID positive patients having digital gangrenes. So this one such case report which showed gangrene in the right hand and also in the right foot. So, and we also have other literature supporting this gangrene, where patient had a severe acute dried gangrene in COVID-19 patients. So in this patient also they had gangrene in the left forearm, the left fingers, and also in the left foot. So these patients also underwent amputation for the same, and one of the patients has passed away due to the viral infection. And we also have some supportive evidences for the Guillain-Barré syndrome, where there are as many as 33 cases reported on the outside, and we also have much more cases in India where we have Guillain-Barré syndrome. And the main reason they are found to be that's the autoimmune reaction that is formed against the peripheral nerve antigens in light of the lack of viral genome in the CSF. So in Mumbai, we have also many reported cases with Guillain-Barré syndrome and COVID patients where they have paraparesis and paraplegias. And for also thrombosis, we have many reported cases for arterial thrombosis in COVID patients, both arterial and venous. Whereas we have one case report which suppose our case where the 24-year-old male who was an adult with non-severe COVID-19 has diagnosed with femoral arterial thrombosis after discharge from the hospital of 1 month. So they also done catheter-based thrombolysis and anticoagulants. So always recovery from COVID-19 can take a long time, even in young adults with non-chronic conditions. And also 1 in 5 patients who was previously healthy were back to usual health after 14-21 days after testing positive. So it's always better to stay 6 feet from others, and also wash hands frequently, and also have protective face masks and caps. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's a very elaborate question.
Suresh.
Okay. Very interesting presentation for COVID. Thank you for sharing your history. Any suggestions?
Just to highlight the problems of COVID, just to tell them don't take COVID-19.
So the message is not take COVID-19. Next, I invite the President to slide.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
No, my question is that, usually in COVID patient, they do D-dimer testing and they start on the, low molecular weight heparin or ecosprin, clopidogrel, all these things. Has it been started in this patient or it was not started?
Yes, sir, it was started on the day of admission, sir. But in spite of the anticoagulants, the patient developed the thrombosis, sir. And we also have many reported cases, in spite of starting on the anticoagulants, they have developed thrombosis, sir.
Okay, what was the D-dimer level? Any idea? You don't know. Patient might be there.
D-dimer.
Yeah.
Oh, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
And also, whatever is there, everything is good. I mean, there are not it's not complete.
Was he on
Suresh.
aspirin and
It goes straight. It goes straight. It goes on the it goes and then it goes.
ஓகேவா? Good evening, friends. I'll be very quick. Yeah, this is a 45-year-old guy, fell down from two-wheeler, sustained this fracture. Simple, straightforward supracondylar fracture, nothing great in this fracture. So I decided to put a supracondylar nail the next day. Hope everybody will agree it's a reasonable fixation. Everything was all right. Came for review every couple of weeks, everything going smooth. 4 months, he came with a huge swelling of the thigh, very painful, not able to walk, on and off fever. Yes, you can see the signs of infection. There is periosteal reaction, osteolysis, everything. So yes, are 70 with a CRP of 36. So straightforward post-operative infection with the implant in situ. So now the diagnosis is easy. So management. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. He came. No. Just he's from Karur. Every month he came. Suddenly, 4 months, huge swelling. Okay, but anyway, I'll see the feature X-rays. Okay. These are only. Anyway, any other options? Huh? LRS, X-Fix. Anybody for plating? No. Rex, what would you do? Is your case? Okay. LRS, X-Fix. So somehow I hate X-Fix. So I decided to travel a different route. That's what I did. I removed the nail, debrided well, put a small supracondylar nail, coated with antibiotic cement. I couldn't grow anything, so I put Tobra and Banco along with stimulant beads. This guy, I don't want to do further operations. As usual, the economical issue also there. He said, sir, I don't want further operation. So I decided, if I put antibiotic cemented beads, I have to remove and it requires another surgery and cost everything. So I put stimulant beads around the fracture and an antibiotic coated nail inside. The stimulant bead dissolved in 1 month. And this is the X-rays, follow-up X-rays, 3-month follow-up X-ray. And it looks the infection subsided. Even the periosteal reaction, everything also getting disappeared. And this is the latest X-ray. It looks healed. Patient is completely pain-free. Almost he got range of movement 0 to 90. So it worked.
A short IMSC.
Okay.
One success. Can't complain, but the long name is
You want further long name?
it has to go to the
Really?
It has to cross the east coast and go to the almost to the restaurant.
Is it so? So that's the reason for infection. Anyway,
It is not, sir, if it is not united, then people always say that you have to put a lot of negative.
United. Okay. But Anyway,
You apply a cement around the nail.
yeah,
How big it become now? How big? Size?
that smallest nail actually. Okay, I think it's 8 mm nail and coated with antibiotic. So somehow it's working. Okay.
But this cement nails are supposed to be temporary.
Supposed to be temporary, it's no problem yet. So if he comes,
I'm not sure if the factory is completely clean.
it's not completely, but it's healing.
It is healing.
He's healing.
One more point I
It's
can
still the access.
is that, so one more point I can shoot back on the pain on the second stage is that it is already infected. And we are going to open the knee joint and if we infect the knee, then we are finished.
It's
So
true.
that is also again.
Of course.
For a regular nail, it is okay.
Okay, yeah, of course.
But
I-
particular nail, the infection, I think it's too risky to open the knee. But I think we are already originally infected. I mean, whether it is the infected or it's the OAT, we don't know. Because even
The first X-ray also was little.
It's a novel technique. It's a novel technique, but is there any reason why the proximal screw is it just a
It did grow.
the missing
No, no. It's inside the hole only, but I couldn't.
You do not want to go through the front that's right.
Huh?
The question to,
Exactly.
the
So,
question to
yes.
Dinanagar is, what is not complete cement?
No, the nail, the cement does not give strength. Cement cells.
No, I'm telling. Cement is just surrounding the nail.
Yeah, the nail is too thin. I don't think it is enough. I don't know that assumption.
See, now if the fracture is united, it doesn't matter.
The fracture is
United doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
But like standard, this one, I really remove the antibiotic which is routinely.
The idea of removing the cement with the antibiotic for the cement after some time,
Most of the new things are happening out of the.
some of them do come back. The big itself is a foreign body inside. I mean, this case we lucky that's different.
No, profit is
But
made
it's
by the new now.
it's not new. It's been reported. People have done this. People have done that.
Any previous inspection, fracture means we have to remove the implant. We get the nail or coated nail. It will act as a source of infection. After the fracture, consolidation of the nail.
Exactly, of course. Now, the best, if the fracture is united, he will happily come for removal. Exactly. So,
Like this, like, we do first stage revision, like first stage revision for infected. I think, yeah, they do it. It's like same thing.
is your case. The next. I have another case. Actually, Dansagar is supposed to present, but anyhow, I'll present on behalf of him. இங்க பார்த்தது போவோம். Move ஆக மாட்டேங்குது. I think you remember this lady? Okay, Dansar did bilateral knee replacement, of course, 7-8 years back. Everything went all right. After a few years, the right got infected. So he decided to do 2-stage revision. This is the first stage revision, exactly 2 years back. See, he was waiting to do the second stage. By the time, I don't know why he divorced Dansagar and came to me. That's the time I did a conference. I was desperate for a case. When she came, I welcomed her. Okay, so that actually the German surgeon did the second stage. Okay, this is the immediate post-op. Everything look all right. This is another follow-up. Fantastic. Unfortunately, the honeymoon lasted only for 2 years. She came 2 weeks back with this. Now, I'm waiting for her to divorce me. But she's keep on coming. Even today also she came. So I'm going to tell the previous boyfriend is waiting. Anyhow, that's a different matter. But this is the X-ray. So she's fed up. She says, "I don't want any surgery. Please, without surgery, do something." Okay. So is it Dansagar? Tell me your case.
I'm getting till it becomes
Huh?
closer.
She's only 50. 50. Ask the surgeon. Nothing.
Till the process became unstable, they were happy.
Exactly. Yeah. As he's walking, on of pain, but still walking. So, as you said, when she can't walk, she may agree for something. So, okay, if she agrees to do something, what will you do?
Fusion.
Fusion. No re-revision.
I don't think so.
Why not? If we agree, why not?
Re-revision. Okay, I'll send to you. Yeah, Mohammed is there. I will ask him.
Infection.
Yeah, this is a reinfection after revision. So, is the patient diabetic or any immunosuppressive?
Diabetic, yes.
Diabetic, yeah. No, there are high chances that she may get again infected if you do whatever, put a knee in. The problem is this patient, it's a cemented stems which has been put inside both on the femoral side and tibial side. It will be challenging to take out the implant and all the cement. Of course, after that it will require fusion. And right now, because they will, and she will have a lot of bone loss also because one revision has been done. So there will be a huge gap which will be present. So that's what in my presentation I have kept that recently now there's a cam titan nail which has come. It's a titanium nail which you put for fusion. So you put a rod inside, and then join it with couple of screws. So it's a fusion but with a nail so that this much space can be addressed there. So fusion is the only
So,
answer.
fusion, if she comes. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we'll move on to the guest lectures. So I'd like to invite our guest speaker of today evening, Professor Subhranshu Mohanty. Slide share it, yeah. So I'd like to invite Professor Subhranshu Mohanty, who is a professor in orthopedics in King Edward Memorial Hospital, Mumbai. He's a consultant orthoplastic surgeon at Jaslok, Nanavati and Sushruta Hospital. He is a president of the Bombay Orthopedic Society, and he is the present president of the Indian Orthoplasty Association, and he is education chair of the Indian Society of Hip and Knee Surgeons, and he is organizing co-chair of the upcoming IACON meeting in Mumbai. He specializes in primary and revision hip and knee replacement surgeries, done more than 7,000 surgeries, especially revision infected joints and management of hemophilia. He's published more than 100 scientific peer-reviewed articles in peer-reviewed journals and 28 textbook chapters. He's a reviewer in orthoplasty of BJJ, IJO, and CCOT. He has delivered the Silver Jubilee Oration of IACON 2050. So I welcome you, sir, for the meeting. I request you to share your screen. He's going to give us two lectures. One topic on non-union fracture neck of femur. Second is management of infected total knee replacement. It's a great pleasure that you could join us today for a meeting. Thank you, sir. Can you share your screen?
Is it visible?
Yes, sir. Visible and well audible.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dhanasekar. It is indeed a great pleasure and honor to be invited by Coimbatore Orthopedic Association. And I thank Dr. Balasubramaniam, the president, and Dr. Dhanasekar Raja, secretary of the association, for inviting me today. at present also, I am the president of Bombay Orthopedic Society, and it is really, such a pleasure to see that, case presentation sessions, which we have been continuing in Bombay Orthopedic Society since 1965, since its inception, when Dr. R.J. Katrak, Dr. Dholakia, Dr. Ellen Bora, who were the pioneers, and they started Bombay Orthopedic Society with these case presentation sessions. And still, in 6 times in a year, we have a case presentation clinical meeting of Bombay Orthopedic Society, where you see really people, the stalwarts, fighting with each other regarding the management of the cases. And though outside the hall they are friends, but inside the hall they really fight, and it's a pleasant to see that how they fight over the management of the clinical cases. And alternate month we do our master cares, master shares, which is on a focused topic. People share in detail about the about the different aspects of orthopedics. And usually these meetings are half a day, 9 to 1, and Maharashtra Medical Council, they give credit hours for this kind of meetings. And this is in addition to all other academic programs as well. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about non-union of the fracture neck femur, because this is a forum for all general orthopedic surgeons. And next topic I'll share with infected total knee replacement, where we saw 2 cases today. So that was a very burning topic, and as arthroplasty surgeon, I will share my thoughts on that. Now, fracture neck femur, as we classically have been taught right from our postgraduate days, it's an unsolved fracture. Why it is unsolved? It is still unsolved fracture because of 2 things. First thing, the treatment guidelines is yet to be established in different age groups. And number 2, because the outcome of the treatment, whatever you do in fracture neck femur, is highly unpredictable. This is why because of these 2 reasons, it has been specified as an unsolved fracture. Though classically you see Campbell and books that a non-union has been described 9 months, when the time has elapsed of 9 months for every fracture in long bone fractures, whereas fracture neck femur is defined as non-union after only 3 months of the injury. Now there are different types of terminologies. So this is the established terminology. One must remember, when somebody tells it's a delayed presentation, it is usually within 48 hours to 3 weeks after the injury the patient has presented. That is a delayed presentation of fracture neck femur. Less than 48 hours, it is considered as a fresh fracture. So 48 hours to 3 weeks, it is delayed presentation. When the delay is more than 3 weeks, it is known as a neglected fracture neck femur. And when it is beyond 3 months, we tell non-union of the fracture neck femur. Why it is important? Because of 2 main complications, as you know, because the avascular necrosis, which occurs from 12% till the tune of 86%, and the non-union occurs in 12 to 40% in different literature and different books or whatever you go. So there are 2 main complications. That's why one need to avoid these 2 complications. Now, 2 main important classification which has been used from ages together in the Gardens classification. One is Powell's classification. As you know, Gardens classification is based on the displacement. That tells you the method of treatment which is to be done. And Powell's classification depends on the angle, that is less than 30, 30 to 50, and more than 50. And it is usually designated for prognostic purposes, that how the fracture will behave. But Powell's angle is especially helpful when you are doing a osteotomy in non-union fracture neck femurs. And it's a classical presentation. If the non-union fracture neck femur patient walks with some kind of support and limping, the leg will be externally rotated. There is external rotational deformity. And when you do telescoping, you will find telescoping will be positive in this kind of patient. That's how you diagnose clinically. And when you do the investigation, the first and most important thing is X-ray. And please remember, while we teach our postgraduates to take X-ray, any kind of hip fractures, please take a traction view. Otherwise, patient may have to repeat the X-ray. So AP view in traction and internal rotation, and always take a lateral view in order to see the femoral canal and is there any deformities present in the femur. because this helps in the diagnosis and to classify the neglected fracture or non-union of the fracture. In addition to that, if the patient has been treated before with some kind of internal fixation, then you can do a CT scan in order to assess the fracture union if it is not apparent from the X-ray. There may be bony sclerosis, trabecular resorption, and sometimes when you strongly feel that there is a fracture but X-ray doesn't show any fracture, that means there might be some kind of microfractures which will be evident from the CT scan. And of course, subchondral collapse in delayed presentations one need to see, because that will decide the method of treatment. Once the collapse occurs, then the head probably is not salvageable. So CT scan helps in these kind of special cases where you have to take a CT scan. Whereas MRI is done only to study the viability of the femoral head, whether there is avascular necrosis changes or it is not there. So these are the three basic investigations, and one should do a X-ray, then followed by CT scan or MRI if it is required. This is the only classification which is available in the literature for neglected fracture neck femur, and fortunately it is from our country, India, by Professor H.S. Sandhu from Amritsar, and this is published in 2005 Clinical Orthopedic CORR. And it depends on the length of the proximal fragment, that means the head fragment, and what is the gap, length of the gap present at the non-union site. How to measure the length of the proximal fragment? It is measured from the fovea centralis to the midpoint of the fracture margin. So this is how you measure the length of the proximal fragment. And since you have taken a traction internal rotation view, you can measure the fracture gap there. And one must remember 1 centimeter and 1 inch. If the length of the proximal fragment is more than 1 inch and the gap is less than 1 centimeter, this is group 1. When the length of the proximal fragment is more than 1 inch and the gap is 1 centimeter to 1 inch, it is group 2. And group 3, when the proximal fragment is less than 1 inch and gap is more than 1 inch. Okay, so 1 centimeter, 1 inch, very easy to remember. But any of these groups, if is associated with the avascular necrosis, that falls into group 3. That means group 1 or group 2, if there is associated avascular necrosis, it is group 3. So accordingly, the plan of treatment is decided in non-union fracture neck femurs. So as you know, the classical postgraduate teaching again for the blood supply for the head of the femur. And as you know, the most important blood supply is the lateral retinacular vessels, which arises from the deep branch of medial circumflex femoral artery, because this blood supplies the weight-bearing portion, the anterior superior lateral aspect of the head, which is the weight-bearing portion. So if this collapses, patient gets pain, and that affects the mobility of this patient. The factors which contribute to non-union, that inaccurate reduction. So while treating a primary fracture, one need to look for the very accurate reduction of this transauricular fracture femur. If there is loss of fixation, whatever fixation you have used, if there is vascular insufficiency during the primary injury, that means especially the lateral epiphyseal vessels, if they are injured, then that will lead to bad outcome of the fracture. If there is a posterior comminution or posteromedial comminution, then that will not help in anatomically reducing the fracture, and hence it will be detrimental for the union, and when the patient doesn't receive any treatment. So these are the cause of non-union. So while the fracture neck femur is treated, one should look towards this aspect. So treatment, the goal of the treatment remains and the aim of the treatment is to achieve a painless, mobile and stable hip. And that depends the age of the patient, the physical status of the patient, what is the duration of non-union, and what is the viability of head, and whether there is a collapse of the femoral head. And what is the amount of neck resorption, because if the neck is resorbed, then certain procedures cannot be done. That I'll tell you in the subsequent parts of my presentation. And how much limb length inequality, whether there is a shortening or there is no shortening. So the decision making remains that if the fracture is less than 3 weeks, that means it is a delayed presentation, but it is not a non-union. Irrespective of the vascularity of the head, irrespective of the reduction, good reduction and neck shaft angle maintained, you have to fix it. Okay, if it is in a delayed presentation, however, whatever may be, you have to fix it and see that you achieve a good reduction and neck shaft angle is maintained. That is more important again. That is a stage 1. But if it is 3 weeks to 3 months, that means, then in addition to fixation, one has to give some kind of augmentation in the form of bone grafting or muscle pedicle bone grafting. That is the stage 2. But when it is beyond 3 months, usually the patients are walking, there may be associated with some amount of shortening or various varus, deformity of the hip, neck shaft angle is, reduced. So there one has to do a osteotomy, and along with osteotomy, you can add a bone graft or you may not add a bone graft. So if it is beyond 3 months, usually it requires a osteotomy, that is a valgus osteotomy or abduction osteotomy, whatever you tell. But if there is segmental collapse or there is avascular necrosis and beyond 3 months, then usually replacement arthroplasty is the option, that is stage 3. And what kind of replacement is required, that we'll discuss again in the later part when you go on discussing about the treatment of this non-union. So as you know, less than 3 weeks, one should try to achieve a close reduction plus internal fixation, and these are different methods which has been described in the literature. So this is 3-screw fixation, inverted triangle, configuration. Remember, this most important screw is the Kalkar screw, which maintains the valgus, and that maintains the neck shaft angle, the valgus reduction of the, fracture neck femur. Or you can do a DHS with a superior screw, or you can use a lateral buttressing plate with multiple screws there. So different, implants have got different outcomes. One can go through this literature. Then in case of non-union, when there's a closed reduction or open reduction with a single or double fibula graft, when this is usually in group 2. Why fibula? Because fibula provides a mechanical strength as well as it is a biological solution which stimulates the non-union, the union of the fracture. That's why both mechanical and biological solution for the fibula. And technically less demanding in young adults, though vascularized fibula is superior, but then you require a plastic surgeon to help you there. But as an orthopedic surgeon, it is technically less demanding to use a non-vascularized fibula there. So suppose this case, this is the lateral view. But remember, whenever you put fibula and the screws, either you can put 2 fibula and 1 screw in between, or you can use 2 screws superiorly and inferiorly, 1 fibula in between. So if the neck is broad, then you can use 2 fibula, 1 screw, or the neck is narrow, then you can use 2 screws and 1 fibula. And this is the usual configuration of your guide wires when you use fibula, that here you don't follow the inferior triangle configuration. Here you pass 3 guide wires so that it remains parallel in both AP and lateral views. So 1 guide wire goes anterosuperiorly, 1 is centrocentral, and 3rd one goes in posterior inferiorly. So this configuration you have to follow so that that particular fracture which you treated, which is a 8 months old non-union, here 2 fibula and 1 screw, that leads to union of the fracture, and that is the lateral view of the patient. This was 8 months old non-union in a patient who was seropositive for HIV, and hence it was not treated. Young chap, 25 years, and we achieved a good union, and he has got a good function post-operatively. So the results are, most of the studies are done for Indian population, and Sandhu's article shows that 178 patient with a 6.5% non-union and 12% avascular necrosis. But if you see the literature, the other literatures, the result functional outcome is 90% to 96% good, hip score. So it is a good method of treatment. The beauty of this fibula graft is that even if the neck is observed, it is absent, you can use this method of treatment. The second thing is you can do a muscle pedicle bone graft with or without fixation. Very old article by Mayers, 1974, where he used a quadratus femoris muscle pedicle bone graft, where you have to go by posterior approach. So patient has to be either in the prone position or in the lateral decubitus position. In the prone position, it is better because you can give traction to this patient in order to reduce that fracture. So this whole quadratus femoris is lifted with bone or periosteum. Then you make a trough here, and then you put the quadratus femoris graft in the trough and fix it with a screw or a K-wire. But remember that in this muscle pedicle bone graft, anatomical reduction is not mandatory, because the bone graft, helps in the, putting as a augmentation for the union. And neck should not be completely observed. If the neck is completely observed, then you cannot do a muscle pedicle bone graft because there is no place to put this bone graft. Then you can fix with the screw or a wire. And our own Professor Baxi in 1986 have done with quadratus femoris or gluteus medius graft also by, and tensor fascia lata sartorius graft also has been used. And depending on what graft you are taking, the patient will be lateral or supine position. Lateral position, he takes gluteus medius muscle pedicle bone graft. In the supine position, he takes, tensor fascia lata or sartorius, muscle pedicle bone graft. This is one of the cases, representative cases. So you can pass the screws and put the muscle pedicle graft. This is quadratus femoris, which has been fixed on the posterior aspect on that patient. Next option is a valgus osteotomy, which was described initially by Powell in 1927. The principle is that you convert the shear forces into compressive forces. That means you measure the Powell's angle, and this vertical angle is converted to a shear forces by making it horizontal. The advantage is that valgus intertrochanteric osteotomy, it corrects the coxa vara. So the patient has presented late, and when coxa vara is corrected, so there is associated limb length discrepancy also gets corrected. So patient gets little limb length. So when there is shortening or coxa vara, then you may do a valgus osteotomy. Marty subsequently popularized it. The disadvantage is that approximately 20 to 30 degree of wedge you can take out in order to correct the valgus, but if you correct more beyond 30 or 40 degrees, then there is a compromise of blood supply, and that may land up in the avascular necrosis. And also, if you do excessive valgus, then future THR becomes difficult. So in this particular case where non-union with a screws are there, so this is a valgus osteotomy supplemented with a fibular graft with a DHS. Now most of us use DHS rather than using this type of angle blade plate. And that is the lateral view of this patient. Now 3-in-1 procedure published by Devadas et al. So in here, it is uses DHS or angle blade plate, does a valgus osteotomy, and always uses non-muscularized fibular graft. So 3-in-1 procedure. So it converts the fracture line from shearing forces to compressive forces, as well as provides the graft for augmentation or for the union, and also fixes with a angle blade plate or DHS there. So that is 3-in-1 procedure which has been described. The last option remains a replacement arthroplasty. Now, whether to go with a bipolar arthroplasty or total hip replacement, it depends on the patient, characteristics. So if the patient's age is young age, less than 75 years, and patient is physiologically active, or patient has got any pre-existing arthritis, then THR is a better option because it provides more predictable pain relief and gives a better functional outcome. You can decide upon cemented or cementless depending upon the bone quality of the patient. Whereas bipolar arthroplasty is preferred in more than 75 years when the patient has got a sedentary lifestyle and it's a less invasive and quick procedure. And again, cemented or cementless you can prefer depending upon the bone quality as well as depending upon the association of medical comorbidities. Patients usually having the cardiac or cardiopulmonary issues, then better to go for a cementless kind of prosthesis. And of course, theoretically, there is a chance of future conversion to total hip replacement. Now, this is an uncemented bipolar hemiarthroplasty done on a patient who has got a very good bone quality, as you can see from the corticomedullary ratio here, and patient was beyond 75 years of age. Now, couple of points when you do arthroplasty or total hip replacement in case of fracture neck femur. Remember, the literature shows that consider anterolateral approach because the dislocation rates are extremely low compared to posterior approach. But if you are doing a posterior approach like me, who always prefers a posterior approach, then meticulously reconstruct the capsulo-ligamentous structures or musculocapsular structures so that it will prevent a dislocation. And please avoid sacrificing the gluteus maximus attachment. You should not release gluteus maximus at all. You will have a good exposure without releasing gluteus maximus because that will lead to lengthening of the leg. Then selective use of larger head as far as possible. And now, of course, dual mobility hips have come, but remember, dual mobility hips is not the only answer for this fractured neck femur. You prefer dual mobility hips if especially the cuff sizes are smaller, less than, you say, 46 or 44, then prefer a dual mobility hip. It is not that dual mobility hip is out of any complications. But definitely, total hip arthroplasty improves the functional outcome, and there is lower reoperation rates compared to hemiarthroplasty. But one important complication that there is a higher dislocation rates in total hip arthroplasty compared to hemiarthroplasty. And as I told you, this patient may land up in limb length discrepancy. So please avoid releasing gluteus maximus. And some people prefer also not to release piriformis so that there is a better functional outcome. This is one of my patient, 102 years old, and presented, and this is of course a type B canal where there is a cylindrical canal. I did a cemented type of total hip arthroplasty, and this is 4 years post-op of this patient. And after that, the patient of course passed away due to some medical problem. So this is a algorithm which we give, and just we discussed in the Asia Pacific Arthroplasty Society meeting in this evening, that when the elderly patient more than 65 years, there is a femoral neck fracture. If it is not displaced, consider open reduction and internal fixation. That means whether it is a valgus impacted type or is a undisplaced, Gardner type 1 and type 2, then consider a, internal fixation. But if it is displaced fracture and patient cognitively intact and is an ambulator, community ambulator, and got a good life expectancy, then prefer a total hip arthroplasty. But if patient cognitively not intact and patient is not a good community ambulator or the life expectancy is not good, then consider the hemiarthroplasty in those kind of patients. Out of hemiarthroplasty, you can do a cemented or uncemented. Nowadays, we prefer uncemented arthroplasty in most of the cases, except in a Dors type C canal, which is a cylindrical canal. There you do a cemented kind of arthroplasty. Otherwise, Dors type A and type B, patients with cardiopulmonary comorbidity or patient high risk of anesthesia ASA 3 or above, in these kind of patients prefer a uncemented kind of prosthesis. Now, in hemiarthroplasty, there is a possibility of doing bipolar or Austin Moore. Though literature shows Austin Moore is a prosthesis to be thrown out, but still in our country, we need to do Austin Moore in some patients. So my preference to do bipolar when the expected longevity is more than 5 years, but the patient longevity is least expected less than 5 years, 2 to 3 years, I do a Austin Moore prosthesis in very rare cases. And sometimes in a public hospital scenario, when the patient is not affording economically, then we also do a Austin Moore prosthesis. So take home message, dear friends, fracture neck of the femur is designated as a non-union when it is more than 3 months after injury. Patient has pain and inability to walk. Clinically, you diagnose with an externally rotated leg with a Trendelenburg and telescoping positive, and patient has an antalgic gait. X-ray, take a X-ray in traction and internal rotation and confirm and classify according to Sandhu's classification. MRI to know the viability of the head, CT scan to know the fracture union and sclerosis of the fracture fragment. You can do a close reduction internal fixation, or you can augment with a fibula or muscle pedicle bone grafting. And valgus osteotomy should be preferable on, whenever there is a varus deformity and leg discrepancy. And if there is a associated avascular necrosis or collapse of the subchondral collapse, then prefer a hemiarthroplasty or total hip replacement, especially in displaced fractures more than 65 years of age. And still, it is an unsolved fracture because the outcome of all this treatment, it's still unpredictable in different age groups and in different countries. I would urge you to read this, Indian Journal of Orthopedics Treatment of Neglected Femoral Neck Fracture by Anil Jain et al. It's a beautiful article and it gives a very clear-cut literature review about the treatment. I thank you for a patient hearing.
Thank you, sir, for a wonderful lecture. Open for discussion.
Sir, it is a nice lecture, good overview of all the treatment options available. There are two questions, sir. One is, do you use autograft fibula, or you can use allograft also.
Sorry, I couldn't hear. Can Dhanashekhar, could you please tell it in the mic?
Sir, now audible, sir.
It's voice is not clear. It's probably in the hall. That's why it is. There is some echo
Now
effect.
audible, sir. Now.
If you
Now
could
audible, sir.
come to the mic and near the laptop on the podium.
Sir, now audible, sir.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. No, just wanted to ask you. It was a nice lecture, sir. Whether always fibula graft should be autograft, or we can use allograft also if it is available.
Oh yeah, fibula autograft or allograft. It is no, as you know that always it is preferable to use autograft because it has got osteogenesis potential. Allograft doesn't have a osteogenesis potential. It is just a osteoconductive. So and the mechanical strength of allograft is also poor compared to autograft. So preferable to use a autograft, but if due to some reason that you are not able to take the autograft, then you can always use a allograft. But you have to have a bone bank accessible for that to use that allograft.
One more question is this one latest in 2019 Journal of Orthopedic Trauma published impaction bone grafting and valgus osteotomy as a technical trick in the Journal of Orthopedic Trauma, and we have done this technique in 44 patients, and we have very good results with that technique. And this technique, what we do is through the DHS hole, we try to pack as much as possible marginalized cancellous grafts, highlighted grafts through a small sleeve, and then we do DHS fixation. And if needed for mechanical stability alone, we use fibula graft. If the contact is good, we don't use fibula graft, and we do routinely valgus osteotomy and DHS fixation. And we got a very good results with this technique. This was reported in the last year JOT.
Okay, fantastic. Fantastic that you add in addition to fibula, if you can add cancellous bone graft impacted there, that will give osteogenesis, osteoconduction, and osteoinduction as well. So it will help better union.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. Can I have one question, please?
Yes, yes.
Hello.
So are you able to hear the question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Is there any maximum limit of the bench to be needed? Maximum limit.
Maximum limit of?
Bench.
How much valgus you can do? The question is how much valgus you can do, maximum.
Yeah, that is important in valgus osteotomy. Maximum 30 to 40 degree you can correct it, but even if it is more than you have to measure the Powell's angle. What is the existing Powell's angle and how much you are going to correct? But it is beyond 50 degrees. Usually it is difficult to do a abduction osteotomy in those cases. Then it will be a huge amount of valgus which will create. And when the valgus is more, then there is increased joint reaction force. When there is increased joint reaction force, that leads to avascular necrosis in the head. And when there is huge valgus you give, suppose in future the patient requires a totally arthroplasty, then it becomes difficult to negotiate the canal. So hence, whatever may be the angle, so usually we give around 30 degree of correction, so that at least you convert that amount of shear force to some amount of compressive force.
Thank you.
So one more question. Small group of patients, even after successful healing of the fracture, they go for secondary AVN and collapse, and later on they need a total hip replacement, which is inevitable. And in your practice, how do you look at it? Because they undergone 2 or 3 surgeries, and at the end they go for again hip replacement after 4 or 5 years time. So what is your take on that?
So if it is a displaced fracture, If it is displaced fracture, chances of avascular necrosis is more, because you don't know during the primary injury that how far the blood vessels are injured and how far which part of the head is injured. So if the lateral epiphyseal vessels are injured, the earlier they go to avascular necrosis, that becomes painful. So if the patient is more than 65 years, then straight away you go for any of the replacement procedures if it is a displaced fracture. If it is undisplaced, fine, you can go ahead with the fixation. But more than 65 years, as I showed in my algorithm, it is displaced, then go for a arthroplasty. Whether total hip or hemiarthroplasty, that depends on the activity of the patient and bone quality. If the activity is good, bone quality is good, then you can go ahead with a cementless, hip replacement, total hip replacement. If the activity is not good, and then you can go for a bipolar hemiarthroplasty, and your bone quality will decide about cemented or uncemented. But if it's less than 65 years, then you try to, some kind of fixation. And the second stage, of course, if it fails, then avascular necrosis, you can treat with a total hip replacement. But which patients will go to avascular necrosis, that I told you that it greatly varies in the literature from 12% till 84% patients develop avascular necrosis. That you cannot know. So at least in a young patient, we try to fix it less than 65 years. Whether primarily, abduction osteotomy, it depends on the geometry of the fracture. If it is a vertical fracture comparatively or subcapital fracture, then you can go for a primary abduction osteotomy rather than only fixing with 3 screws. And sometimes now we are also in a fresh fracture. Suppose the patient is subcapital fracture or vertical fracture, we augment it with a fibula. So give 2 screws fibula or 2 fibula, 1 screw. Primarily we do it so that that will help in the union as well.
Sir, regarding the age cutoff, you are telling 65 years. Nowadays, if a patient younger age, like more than 50 with a bad comminuted fracture or patient presenting with a non-union, they tend to favor a total hip replacement. What is your experience? Because they don't want to have multiple surgeries. So
Yeah, that's fine. If it's a badly comminuted fracture or posteromedial combination is there, we know that fracture is going to have a bad outcome. And other delayed presentation, 50 years active patients, then you can go ahead to totally, because totally the pain relief is good and functional outcome is always much better compared to whatever method of treatment. Patient immediately can be mobilized after the surgery. Only thing, one has to be technically perfect to do a good total hip in a transcervical fracture femur. Usually these patients land up in the lengthening, and patient becomes unhappy after the surgery because these patients are completely normal and suddenly one day have fracture, and after treatment you will impose a whole lot of restrictions, avoid ground level activities, do this thing, that thing. They are little unhappy about that. But and they land up in the lengthening, and that's why you have to restore the vertical offset, horizontal offset, and the anteversion or anterior offset. All 3 offsets has to be very meticulously restored. And as I told you that try not to release the gluteus maximus insertion in these kinds of patients, and if possible also don't release the piriformis. The other 2 things that will prevent a lengthening in this kind of patients.
I think with the use of larger heads like 36 head and dual mobility, the stability is improved and the chance of lengthening is reduced now.
Yeah.
The risk of dislocation also is reduced. So we do more of hip replacement for these type of severely comminuted fractures.
Correct.
And,
Yeah. Now that is the trend now, that doing more and more hip replacements, and try to use the larger head as far as possible, 32, 36, depending upon the cuff size, and of course dual mobility. It provides a better stability. But sometimes cost issues are there. Maybe it depends at where somebody practice, whether it is a government public hospital and or in a private hospital setup. So in our country, cost, insurance, these are also factors which needs to be considered while treating this.
yes. So we try to do a hybrid system. We want to reduce the cost. So you have an uncemented socket with a cemented stem with a metal head. It drastically reduces the cost. So we are able to offer hip replacement for most of our patients.
Correct. That's fairly acceptable. Means one can reduce the cost by selecting the implant appropriately. Oh, so what we do, we tell our patient that this is the maximum cost. Suppose you go for a ceramic and uncemented hip, this is the maximum cost. Then he goes for arranges money, then he comes back with our whatever money he arranges. We see what are the best possible option can be provided for that patient within that budget. That's what we do in public hospitals.
Thank you, sir. That's a nice comprehensive coverage of non-union neck We'll go on to the next lecture on infected protein.
Yeah, I'll share my screen.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you are able to see?
Yes, sir. We are able to see this.
Okay. Thank you, Dhanashekhar again. And now the topic which is very close to my heart, my interest is, arthroplasty and more so revising infected joint. Probably most of the infected joints all over the Mumbai city, they refer to me either in private or in my government hospital, that is KM hospital. So I'll give a practical approach to deal with the knee periprosthetic joint infection. So management of a periprosthetic joint infection around the knee is a teamwork. This is a picture of Dahi Handi in Mumbai. If you have read in newspapers that, how Dahi Handi works, that a group of people, they, stand over each other and at last they break the Dahi Handi. So a group of, doctors who will treat the periprosthetic joint infection, the arthroplasty surgeon on the top, next microbiologist, infectious disease specialist, and a good laboratory backup. So basically, you need these four people or these four, scenario to have a good treatment of the management of periprosthetic joint infection. Most of our hospitals, we do not have an infectious disease specialist. So one must remember that it's a boon to have an infectious disease specialist because they will guide you, like we saw in the two cases today in the fungal infection. They will help you that how long the antibiotics to be continued, what are the side effects, and what combination you have to use so that you'll have an optimum outcome. And this is 2011 AOS guidelines for diagnosis of periprosthetic joint infection that most of you know. The first thing is a sinus tract communicating to the prosthesis. 1 second, I'll just I'll close down the other. Okay, sorry about that. AOS guidelines, there are 3 points. The first and important point is a sinus tract communicating the prosthesis. Like we saw in the cases today, that when there is a sinus tract which is communicates the prosthesis, you do not require any other investigation to prove that this joint is infected. But if the sinus tract is not there, then usually we aspirate the knee and send the samples. And usually you must send at least 2 to 3 samples. If there is a more than or equal to 2 tissue or fluid samples, so the growth of the same organism, then the infection is established. And the third point, when 4 out of 6 criteria exist, that is elevated ESR and CRP, ESR more than 30, CRP more than 10, elevated synovial WBC count, it differs in acute or chronic infection. Acute infection, more than 10,000, in chronic infection more than 3,000. Elevated synovial polymorphonuclear, leukocytes, like in acute more than 90%, in chronic more than 80%, and presence of frank pus in the joint, isolation of microorganism in one culture, and when you take a tissue sample for histopathological examination, there should be at least more than 5 neutrophils per hyperfield in 5 hyperfields in 400 into magnification. So these are the criteria which was delineated in 2011. In 2013, they took out this criteria, that presence of frank pus, and they designated that 3 out of 5 criteria should exist in order to diagnose infection. So nowadays, most of us, we follow this criteria given by the American Academy led by Javed Parvizi et al. So this is an algorithm for diagnosis which we usually follow. When you suspect a patient clinically being assessed for suspected infection, what you do? First you do ESR and CRP. So if ESR and CRP both are positive, both are high, then infection is likely. But if you see either of them are positive, that means either ESR or CRP is positive, then proceed to knee aspiration. That is a step 1. So when you aspirate the knee, you send the samples for total count, differential count, and culture and sensitivity. If total count, differential count, and culture sensitive both are positive, that means growth of organism there, then again infection is likely. But if you see the total count, differential count is more, or culture sensitivity is positive, that means either of them are positive, then you wait for some time, then do a repeat knee aspiration after 2 weeks. But please remember, during this 2 weeks period, the patient should be off antibiotics totally. You just give a symptomatic treatment of giving only some NSAID or analgesics. Because if it is infection, it is going to flare up definitely, and you have to treat it. If it is not infection, it is not going to flare up. So give the symptomatic treatment. Please do not treat these patients with antibiotic during this 2 weeks period. Next, we go to step 3. So repeat in knee aspiration if either of them are positive, that means total count and differential count or the culture. If either of them are positive, then infection is likely. But if both of them are negative, then there is a dilemma lies, whether it is infection or not infection. So in these cases, you look at the X-ray. If the prosthesis appears loose, that means you have to intervene this patient, so you have to do a surgery. So you have to open up, and intraoperatively you have to send the frozen section, and you should have experienced pathologists to tell you that there are more than 5 to 10 neutrophils per hypoarc field. So infection is likely. But if surgery is not planned, that means your prosthesis looks well fixed and good, plan is aligned, then you have to wait and observe this patient for at least 3 months, and then repeat the whole algorithm from the beginning. And again, I stress upon here that within these 3 months, you should be under the patient should be under your direct observation. Nobody should put a antibiotic or give antibiotic to this patient. Then whole scenario gets altered. And again, I'm telling you, if it is infection, it will flare up and you have to treat this patient. If it is not infection, then it will not be infected, and then the patient will be cleared of infection. But if it is infected, somehow or other it will flare up and it will get revealed one day or other in future. The role of nuclear imaging has not been proved in the literature, so no amount of bone scan, RBC level bone scan, or your indium 1,1 level white cell scan, it is not helpful. PET scan, etc. Some people, they go on doing these scanning procedures, but it is not helpful. But if the patient you observe after 3 months, still you are not sure, you can do a nuclear imaging at that stage. Otherwise, its role is very limited in diagnosis of periprosthetic joint infection. Now, this is 2018 criteria for periprosthetic joint infection diagnosis, but it is not very helpful in our country because it mostly depends on laboratory parameters like D-dimer level, then leukocyte esterase strip. That is the, like you see the pregnancy test with the urine strip, there is a leukocyte esterase strip which is used to, check for the infection by aspirating the joint, or alpha defensin level. So all these things which are not commonly available in our country, hence it is not very useful in the diagnosis. But they have given minor criteria, and this major criteria remains same, only the minor criteria changes. But if it is doubtful, then intraoperatively also you can diagnose the infection using this kind of histology, preoperative score, and culture. So these are the criteria, 2018 criteria for periprosthetic joint infection diagnosis. Now we have a modified classification from 2003 onwards, where a type 1 is added there. That is a positive intraoperative culture, supposedly for aseptic revision. That means you have not thought of the infection in this patient, but intraoperatively you have sent tissue samples and or culture, and that became positive afterwards after you put the joint. Otherwise, type 2, 3, and 4, they are pretty old classification. When type 2, it is early postoperative infection less than a month, and type 3, when it is more than a month, is acute hematogenous infection, and late chronic infection is type 4. The treatment options are available. First is the antibiotic suppression or antibiotic therapy. Second option is a debridement and irrigation of the knee. Either you keep the components or remove the components if it is loose. And if you remove the components, either you can reimplant the new components either on the same stage, that is one stage reimplantation, or you can do a two-stage reimplantation by putting a cement spacer inside. And last option remains arthrodesis or a resection arthroplasty. But two-stage reimplantation is the gold standard, and most of us in India, we follow a two-stage reimplantation. Though one-stage reimplantation is gaining popularity in European countries, and some of the surgeons are practicing, especially in the endoclinic in Germany. So type 1 is a positive intraoperative culture. That means this patient was revised for a aseptic loosening, or you have done a primary total hip replacement or total knee replacement. You have not suspected infection, but intraoperatively you found some suspicious tissues and you sent it for culture sensitivity. Then post-operatively you found that there is some growth in the culture. So these patients, you have to treat them with post-operatively antibiotic for 6 weeks as per the culture report. Assess ESR CRP weekly to know the progress, and always in this kind of patients in the histopathology look for the COX in our country, because culture may be negative, but there is a possibility of tuberculosis. And of course, you pray your God that the joint should not get infected. This is one of our patient, a young patient, 38 years. Multiple surgeries has been done for fracture, plastic surgical procedures, got infected. So somebody did a joint replacement, but the joint replacement got infected. So in the first stage, we put a cement spacer there. There are a lot of scar tissues. In the second stage, we converted to a total knee replacement, but the samples sent post-operatively showed that there is a growth of methicillin-sensitive staph aureus from the tibia. We treated with 6 weeks of antibiotic, and subsequently there was no recurrence of the infection, and that is the function 3.5 years follow-up. So you have to be lucky to be successful in these kind of cases. Then comes the type 2, which is the early post-operative infection. That means less than a month after the index surgery. It may be superficial cellulitis to deep infection. You can treat these patients with antibiotics alone, that means antibiotic suppression, or you can go until the debridement. All the cases of wound problems like wound dehiscence, necrosis, infected hematoma, they fall into this type 2 infection. See, antibiotic suppression may control symptoms, delay another operation, but not strictly curative. So antibiotic suppression should not be taken as a method of treatment in suppressing the infection, unless the patient is there is gross contraindication for surgery and patient is not willing for surgery, and there is some other anesthesia risks or etc., or patient longevity is limited, then only you can give antibiotics so that it will suppress the symptom to a certain extent. But antibiotic suppression may lead to development of the resistant organisms. As you can see here, in 1950s we saw penicillin resistant, 70s we saw methicillin resistant, 1990 onwards we saw vancomycin intermediate resistance. 1997 and 2002 onwards we are seeing vancomycin resistant staph aureus as well. So we are adjusting our antibiotics in these resistant organisms. We also published this thing in 2003 JBJS, where we saw that from Wrightington, that out of nearly 9,000 patients, because of preoperative screening, the resistant or infection due to MRSA was only one case was detected because of screening procedure. But what we saw, more than 55% were methicillin resistant coagulase negative staphylococcus. So there is a rise in the trend of resistant organisms. So that's why it is told that the higher the antibiotic chosen by the surgeon for prophylaxis, the lower the confidence in his setup. So inadvertently, just don't give a higher and higher antibiotic to these patients for prophylactic purposes, rather than there should be some rationality in the use of antibiotics. Next comes debridement. So what we tell is a dire, debridement, antibiotics, and implant retention. The usual indication when the joint age is less than 3 months, that means early postoperative infection, or late hematogenous infection, that means less than 3 weeks of the onset of the symptoms. Usually you get best results when the short duration of the surgery, that's in 3 to 4 weeks. There is a stable implant inside and there's a healthy surrounding soft tissue. That means soft tissues are intact and it's a immunocompetent host. So you have to select these patients, very selectively so that you get a good long-term outcome of this dire procedure. But remember, one should not do it as an emergency procedure. Always it has to be done as a routine procedure. Next available routine theater, it should be done. Otherwise, results gets compromised when you do it as a emergency procedure. One must remember when not to do dire, when there's a chronic infection or a presence of a sinus tract like this, or in the X-ray you see there is a loose processes, then dire is not helpful. We must avoid this dire procedure in case of rheumatoid arthritis, when the ESR is high, more than 60, or the duration of symptoms is more than a week, and when there is a resistant organisms like MRSA or gram-negative bacteria, then the outcome is poor in this kind of patients. So basically what you do in dire, you do a complete synovectomy as far as possible. Excise as far as possible, whatever synovum present in the suprapatellar pouch, parapatellar gutters. Take out your polyethylene if it is a, modular type of implant, because after dire procedure, the joint becomes loose. You may have to put a thicker polyethylene. So taking out the polyethylene, you can approach the posterior aspect of the joint, so achieve a very good debridement. And also you can address the, the tibial base plate there. There are always some amount of, infection is there in the, implant polyethylene interspace. Remember that you always curate out at the interface. That is the, implant cement interface and cement bone interface. Take a small curate, always curate it out very meticulously in order to have a good outcome of your dire procedure. Next, you take multiple tissue samples and fluid samples for culture and histopathology. Do a thorough lavage with a hydrogen peroxide betadine. Next, you use a pulsatile lavage in low pressure, and usually I close my skin with a ethylene monofilament nylon so that there are less chances of reinfection. The crux and most important points that always take 5 to 6 tissue samples from the most inflamed site inside the joint from different aspects, suprapatellar pouch, parapatellar gutters on either side, from the posterior aspect of the joint, from the femoral aspect, from the tibial side. So 5 to 6 tissue samples from the most inflamed site should be taken, and it should reach the lab as soon as possible. Immediately it must be transported to the lab, should not be kept in the theater or in the refrigerators. When you want to send it next day or something like that. So the outcome will be more, or the tissue yield, culture yield will be more when you send it as soon as to the laboratory. And you must tell the microbiologist they should put in an enriched medium, and for at least 14 days the culture should be there. And sometimes in the low grade infection, or in a little less virulent organism, they do not grow early within 2 to 3 days, so they take sometimes 10 days to 14 days to grow. And always send a tissue for histopathology to look out for the COX. And as we discussed today, that there is a possibility of fungus as well. So in the histopathology, they should look for the fungus. This is one of our patients, again, bilateral sequential TCAT done in a 56-year-old lady. Left knee got infected, so a dire procedure was done. You have to keep the polyethylene ready because you have to put a thicker polyethylene there, and we use stimulant most of the time impregnated with antibiotics there. That is about 4.5 years follow-up of this patient, infection free. The outcome studies, and as you can see that most of the common organisms, Staphylococcus or coagulopathic Staphylococcus, in our study there is almost 76%, more than 76% success rate. And coagulase negative Staphylococcus, in most of the studies it is seen. Remember, DIAR procedure has got a poorer outcome in knee compared to the hip, and if the patient has got a high ASA or high risk for anesthesia, the DIAR procedure has got a less success rate. Next, the third type is acute hematogenous infection. When it is a hematogenous spread from the remote source, there is always a transient bacteria due to invasive procedure like a tooth extraction or some upper GI endoscopic procedure or urinary tract procedures. There the bacteria occurs and that bacteria leads to periprosthetic joint infection. So usually there is a period of interval period of well-being in this kind of patient, and they are completely all right, but suddenly they start get pain on weight bearing, or in the motion of the knee becomes painful. Sometimes they are febrile as well. So debridement with component retention and removal is the treatment of choice. Next, type 4, late chronic infection. So one stage or two stage procedure is the treatment of choice. The most important advantage of one stage procedure is that there is a superior functional outcome. That patient has got a good movements post-operatively and functioning they are much better. But if you see the Cochrane review that more than 16,000 patients, one stage revision has got a more than 34% greater adjusted risk of reinfection than two stage reimplantation. Though there is a superior functional outcome, there are chances of reinfection is more. That is why two stage exchanges remains the gold standard. So in the first stage, you take out all the debride, take out all the metal implant, take out all the cement, and take out all the foreign bodies, and put an antibiotic impregnated cement spacer. The infective organism see the sensitivity, give appropriate antibiotics for about 6 weeks. ESR at CRP is usually used as a prognostic marker. Patients is usually mobilized with support. Any distant site of infection is eradicated. Then you leave the patient without antibiotics for about 4 to 6 weeks, what is known as antibiotics holiday for the patient. Because there you test for the patient's immunity, so that if the patient is immunocompromised, there are chances of recurrence of infection within this antibiotic holiday. In the second stage, during reimplantation, again take cultures from multiple sites and specimen also you send for histopathology. If in doubt during the second stage, do a frozen section, and if you see this infection still persists, then you have to again do a debridement, take out the cement spacer and put another cement spacer and treat with post-operatively with antibiotics. These are the method of putting the cement spacer. These are the two contoured static spacers using silicon molds, where you prepare the cement spacer like this and you put it inside. Or else, if these are expensive, then you can mold it with your tibial polyethylene here by putting the cement on the femoral side. And on the tibial side, after putting the cement, you take the extracted femoral component and you mold it on that tibial side. But when you are doing any manual articulating spacer like this by putting the molds or the components, then at least you see the stability of the components here. Here, how the femoral component is taken to give a molding there. And then you see the stability they are putting the knee in extension, because if the joint is unstable, the patient will not be able to walk and infection also doesn't get controlled. So all foreign bodies, including cement, needs to be removed. Do not leave any cement inside, because that may lead to recurrence of the infection. Infection doesn't get controlled in presence of instability, and biology takes over when infection gets controlled. They are the important take-home message for this two-stage reconstruction. This is one of the very prized patients. This is a monoblock spacer which I put. It's a primary total knee, was done in way back in 1998 and got infected in 2002. And patient is an extremely high risk and rheumatoid patient, polyarticular rheumatoid with multiple joint deformity. And she didn't opt for treatment, and 16 years old periprosthetic joint infection. He was with a discharging sinus and he was just aspirated twice a year. Every year, twice aspiration was done. And he presented to me with a dislocated knee with extremely osteoporotic bones. So in this kind of patient, we took out the implant. These are earlier monoblock, total condylar knees. That time it was used in 90s. And we prepared 2 cement cigars like this by taking 5cc syringes, 2 5cc syringes joined together, put a K-wire inside 2 cement cigars, and after the cement was set, then we cut these syringes and we delivered these 2 cigars. And we pass 1 cigar into the femoral canal, 1 cigar into the tibial canal, and gave traction so that a space is created there with the K-wires protruding there. And this is just gel foam is put posteriorly so that to protect the neurovascular structures. And then we put a another 2 mixes of cement to act as a spacer there. So we held it in that position till it set. So this is the post-operative X-ray of this patient, AP and lateral view. Of course, we put stimulant in the subcutaneous tissues, posterior aspect of the joint as well. And that is the outcome of this patient. So infection is totally healed and patient is able to mobilize, after 16 years bedridden patient could walk with some kind of support, and it is rollator because he has got multiple joint deformities there. Now is mobilized at home. Now 2-stage reconstruction, this is a ankylosing spondylitis with a total knee which got infected. This is after removal of the implants and debridement. Now we are putting our spacers. We have our own molds prepared with the polysiloxane, and this is autoclavable templates and reusable. So this is how we put our spacer there with a stimulant in the suprapatellar pouch and subcutaneous tissues. That is the post-operative X-ray. Patient could be mobilized. Here you have to put a K-wire as a intramedullary skeleton. And that is the after second stage reconstruction. That is a 4.5-year follow-up of this patient, good restoration of the function. When you use a dynamic spacer like that, patient usually restores a good function because soft tissues are lax and you can achieve a good post-operative range of motion in this kind of patients. Last option remains arthrodesis. With all these mentally impaired patients, or there is a failed 2-stage reconstruction, as you have seen in the second case which was presented today. Failed 2-stage reconstruction, you can do a arthrodesis. And now this is usually a method of arthrodesis. This is a cam tighten nail, which you put a nail inside the femoral canal and put a nail inside this, and then you lock them with couple of screws. So you can address a huge amount of gap here. And because this is titanium, so titanium usually the biofilm formation is poor in titanium implant. That's why this titanium is preferred, and this gives a good outcome. And you can mobilize the patient immediately. It acts like an intramedullary implant. So to conclude, dear friends, ESR CRP aspiration is the hallmark of the diagnosis. In our country, keep a high index of suspicion for COX or fungal infection, especially if the patient is immunocompromised. Keep an eye on antibiotic resistant. Just don't use antibiotics inadvertently just to treat the infection. One need to take a judicious decision for debridement, antibiotics, and implant retention. 2-stage revision remains the gold standard. One must learn the technique of putting a stable cement spacer, how to prepare it on the table, and one must learn the technique of arthrodesis with a cam tighten nail, which I showed you. I thank you for a patient hearing, and of course it is too late. And if any questions in the mind, I can take the questions right now.
Thank you, Dr. Mohanty. It's an excellent lecture on treating infected total knee replacement. I have 3 questions for you.
Yeah.
On behalf of all the members, I'm asking you. One question already we discussed earlier. If you have a patient with painful knee, would you like to aspirate the patient as outpatient procedure, or would you take them to the theater?
See, most of the time I take it to the theater, but it can be done abroad. They do it as a outpatient procedure.
Okay.
But remember that if the patient has been put on antibiotics, just do not do aspiration. You tell the patient to stop antibiotic for at least 2 weeks, then do the aspiration.
Okay.
Because in knee aspiration, it is very predictive. So 95% you will get a good outcome. But if it is a hip aspiration, definitely I would take this patient to the theater, do it under image intensifier, see that my needle reaches the joint, or else we can do a ultrasound guided aspiration by the radiologists.
Okay. In 2-stage revision, what is the protocol? You wait for the CRP-ESR to come down, or you straight away go ahead After 6 weeks or 3 weeks, some people say 3 weeks or 6 weeks. What is your
You know, the clinical impression is the most important thing. If the patient's pain is improved, joint there is no effusion, joint looks dry, patient is mobilized, and no, skin looks healthy, then a decreasing trend of ESR CRP, I'll go ahead with the second stage. Because sometimes in rheumatoid arthritis, the ESR CRP and other inflammatory arthritis, also ESR CRP may not come down to normal. The ESR CRP is normal, but you know, patient clinically there is effusion and all these things, wound doesn't look all right, then probably infection is not controlled. So clinical impression is extremely important, along with a downward trend, a decreasing trend of ESR CRP, that is important. But if there is a, as you know, effusion in the patient during before doing second stage, again I would like to aspirate and send it for again cell count and culture and sensitivity.
So what is your
And all these patients has to be off antibiotics for at least, you know, 4 to 6 weeks. Some people, you know, live 2 weeks, some people 4 weeks. There is no strict guidelines which is given in the literature. Personally, I leave them for 6 weeks of you know, antibiotic free period before going for a second stage.
So what is your protocol for culture negative infections?
Yeah, that is the, you know, biggest problem in our scenario. First thing that, as I told you, that one must leave the patients off antibiotics for at least 2 weeks before aspiration, so that at least you get a, you know, maximum yield of culture. Number two, tell your microbiologist to have a extended culture for 14 days in an enrichment medium. Number three, tissue samples has to be sent, you know, tissue samples from the most inflamed site. If you are taking intraoperative samples, of course, from the most inflamed site should be sent, so that culture yield is maximum. And always look for the, if its culture is negative, look for the, you know, histopathology for tuberculosis, send it for the, you know, gene X or whatever that for tuberculosis, and also fungal culture. But having said that, if all these things are negative, then usually these patients are put on, I put these patients on linezolid with, you know, amikacin if you're, of course, the creatinine is normal. If the patient creatinine not normal, I put linezolid plus, you know, ciprofloxacin, so that I cover up gram positive MRSA as well as gram negative organisms. So that is my antibiotic choice in culture negative, you know, patient.
So how long you continue antibiotics post-op?
In first stage, I continue for 6 weeks, as I told you, and in 6 weeks antibiotic off period. In the second stage, again I send samples. If the culture is negative, then I put up them antibiotic after till the culture report is available. But if the culture shows, I showed you, if it is a type 1 type of infection, again from one side at least, if it shows a growth of the organism, they continue the antibiotic again for 6 weeks and pray for God.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mohanty. I wish you could be here with us physically for the meeting. Actually, I invited Dr. Mohanty for our meeting in March, but his son was taking the final exam, so he couldn't come. But at least we could bring you here virtually for our first physical meeting, hybrid meeting. So it was nice hearing from you. But the transmission was excellent. We were able to hear you very nicely, and it looked as though you physically were here to deliver the lecture. The connection was excellent. So thank you very much for your excellent lectures. On behalf of all the members and our president, Bala Subramaniam, we thank you for your excellent lectures. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, it's a pleasure and honor to be part of, you know, Coimbatore Orthopedics Club. And I thank and Dr. Bala Subramaniam, president of Coimbatore Orthopedic Club, and you, Dr. Dhan, secretary, and all the members of Coimbatore Orthopedic Club for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts. It will be a pleasure and honor to meet sometime in physically whenever, you know, our luck permits. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Good night and have a nice evening. Bye.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
With that, we come to the end of the meeting.